paper, the wordless challenge of John Woo's Silent Night would seem intimidating to most actors, but Joel Kinnaman has always tried to do more with less. The Swedish actor operates with the mindset that the camera can pick up one's thoughts, and so he tries to trim his lines anytime an opportunity and agreement presents itself. Woo's first American film in 20 years would prove to be the most extreme version of this exercise, as Kinnaman plays Brian Godlock, a grieving father who stops at nothing to take down the gang that is responsible for killing his young son and taking away his own ability to speak. Considering the risky premise, Kinnaman felt just enough trepidation to take on the project that has now been received at both ends of the critical spectrum. The Hollywood Reporter called it gripping. If you get it wrong, it can really turn into dog shit. It'd be a failed attempt to do a movie with no dialogue, and that just sounds like a boring travesty, Kinnaman tells THR now that the film has hit PVOD. But it's very cool to get to do a cinematic experiment, something that is artistically courageous. That's what you dream of doing, and it happened to be with a legendary filmmaker. Earlier this year, Kinnaman's thriller Sympathy for the Devil hit theaters, and he enjoyed a front-row seat to the Nicolas Cage show. Cage has a very different process from Kinnaman, so the duo presented an interesting contrast on screen given Cage's audacious approach and Kinnaman's more understated one. The latter recently presented an award to Cage at the Red Sea International Film Festival in Saudi Arabia, and he'll never forget their first day of rehearsal in anticipation of Sympathy for the Devil. I knocked on his door, and when he opened it, he had pink hair. And he was like, "My Wildcat fucking ran away for the third time," Kinnaman says in his best Nick Cage voice. I then got a tour of his house, and he was like, "That's my reptile manager." And then we went down to the basement to rehearse for the first time, and he'd already spent countless hours working on the script to get to a point where he knew it by heart on the first day of rehearsal. So he's a singular artist, and that's why I pinched myself when I got to spend a month in a car with him, just soaking up his genius and lunacy. Below, during a recent conversation with THR, Kinnaman also discusses the pros and cons of method acting, an approach he quickly abandoned on Silent Night. So you were just in Saudi Arabia for the Red Sea International Festival. Did you get a chance to say hello to your tattoo artist, Will Smith? Writer's note, Smith tattooed SKWD on Kinnaman's bicep. Laughs. I did. We hung out for a couple days. It was one of the highlights of the trip, actually. And what about your carpool buddy, Nick Cage? Laughs. I got to hang out with my carpool buddy, too. I actually got to present an award to Nick, and we hung out a little bit before and after. So it was all very cool. Well, a couple years ago, you received a script called Silent Night with John Woo attached, and when you discovered that there's no dialogue, what was the ratio of excitement versus fear? I would say that excitement-fear ratio was something like 80-20. If you get it wrong, it can really turn into dog shit. It'd be a failed attempt to do a movie with no dialogue, and that just sounds like a boring travesty. But it's very cool to get to do a cinematic experiment, something that is artistically courageous. That's what you dream of doing, and it happened to be with a legendary filmmaker. So I'll say 80-20, but I have to have some amount of fear in everything I do or I'm in trouble. That element of fear helps motivate and push you. Well, I've always had this inclination. Coming up as a young actor, people were always clamoring to get more lines, because the people that speak the most are considered to be the most significant, but I was always trying to get rid of my lines. If I could convey the same thing without saying it, it's going to be more interesting. When an older actor told me that nugget, it just stuck with me, and then I started noticing it when watching films. So, if you can get the same thing across without saying anything, it's a better way to tell the story. It's more subtle, and the audience gets to tell themselves the story in a way. You want to make the audience a co-creator, and having them perceive the inner dialogue is always more powerful. You initially tried to go method by not talking at all for a couple months, and while it didn't stick, I was still surprised to hear you attempted it considering you've been on sets, one in particular, 2016's Suicide Squad, where method acting didn't go over very well. Laughs. Did you entertain the idea because you were alone for most of the movie and didn't have to account for a huge ensemble? Yeah, the benefits of method are exaggerated, but it piques people's imagination in a way. In reality, I've actually done that sort of process, but I just don't make the people around me call me Mr. President or whatever. But you stay concentrated in the character, and when you do that, you're always rehearsing. So I would always find long stretches of time at night to go for walks and just interact with people and try an idea that I had, a way of talking, a mannerism, or whatever. So it's a way to try out the character, and if you're doing that for a whole shoot, then you're spending more time with the character, which has value. But I'm very active on my sets, and I'm very active in contributing ideas and collecting ideas from other team members. I love the collective creative process that filmmaking is, and if you're singular in your process where you're just always in character, then you lose out on all of that. You lose out on the input from all the other artists that are on the set. If something isn't going in the right direction and the tone of a scene starts to tilt in a different way, then you have to be able to communicate that. But if you're always in your character, then your hands become tied.